Do you have wisdom on how to never be taken advantage of or be bullied again? We could delve into that a little bit.
Absolutely. Well, I think the first thing is realize that the more eager or the more you want something, the more vulnerable you are.
Okay. So you have to play a game?
Yeah. And I'll share an anecdote because in my, I give talks. I was one of the few male speakers at the Women in Technology International Summit. and there's a couple thousand women and, probably 15 or 20 men that spoke in the 2 or 3 days. And my topic was never be bullied again. And you like my anecdotes? Can I share an anecdote that?
Oh, yes. I love your anecdotes. Yes.
So this is before you were born, I believe. But I say to people, do you know where you were on September 6, 1995? And people say, what the heck are you talking about? And I said, let me refresh your memory. There was a trial going on in America. Maybe you've heard of it. It was called the O.J. Simpson trial. And on September 6, 1995, one of the characters in that trial was a fellow named Detective Mark Furman. And he may have brought the case down because towards the end of the trial, he had said that he had never said the N-word. And then there was proof that he did say the N-word, and things really fell apart after that. And on that day, Detective Mark Furman was questioned by a famous lawyer, F. Lee Bailey, and Detective Mark Furman took the Fifth Amendment. Why am I bringing this up? Because everybody in the world who watched that trial saw him taking the Fifth Amendment except me, because I was sequestered in the top floor of the criminal courts building because I worked with the prosecution during the trial, and F. Lee Bailey had accused me of drugging him or coaching him in his testimony during the cross-examination earlier in the trial. So in the middle of the trial, Detective Mark Furman came across as like John Wayne, really strong. And I got subpoenaed to come in to see if I did anything with him, and I didn't do anything with him. But the subpoena never reached me because it went to a building that I was in that fell down in the 1994 earthquake. So the subpoena couldn't find me. I have it framed on a wall somewhere. So they just couldn't find me after that. And so the trial went along, and then it was towards the end of the trial. And I was there by myself, and I was wondering what's going to happen. And one of the crazy things about me is I always put myself in situations that seem impossible. And I get to the brink of panic, but I never panic. I get smart. And one of these days, I'm going to have a massive stroke with a smile on my face because I will figure out the secret to peace on earth and I'll die. So what happens is I'm there waiting, I'm getting anxious, I'm getting nervous, I'm thinking I'm being set up. And then about 5 p.m., I suddenly figure out F. Lee Bailey and 80% of what I know about difficult people. One thing that nearly all difficult people have in common, and this is not just the venters, this is the whiners, this is the stonewallers, this is the sullen people, it's everyone. One of the things they all have in common is sometimes they will charm you, or else why would you have them in your life to begin with? Then they'll frustrate you. Then they'll anger you. Then they'll outrage you. And most people are uncomfortable with becoming enraged. So when you're there and you're outraged, and you're uncomfortable becoming enraged, you will do everything you can to keep a lid on it because you feel like you're going to go out of control. So difficult people push us into our feeling enraged. And I knew he was going to do that with me because I'd watched him in the court. So I knew that when he came up at 7 p.m. and he was there with an associate of Johnny Cochran, and I was there with one of the other prosecutors, I knew he was going to charm me, frustrate me, anger me, and outrage me, and then hope that I become enraged. So you're going to like this, Mikhaila. So what he didn't know is that I had long cultivated that ability to look into people's eyes and hold their eyes. I can hold your eyes wherever I go, and I could almost hypnotize you by looking in your eyes. And so when he came in, I had him so figured out that I started fumbling, with pens and whatever. And Bill Hodgman, one of the prosecutors, said to me, "Mark, Mr. Bailey's here. He's going to ask you some questions." And I said to Bill Hodgman, one of the prosecutors, "Okay, Bill." And then F. Lee Bailey sits down across the table from me. And then when he sits down, I lock onto his eyes.
Uh-oh.
And I can do whatever I want with his eyes. And I go like this to make sure that I'm locked onto them. And he doesn't know what I'm doing. And then he starts sharing. He says, "We don't exactly know your role here, Dr. Goulston. And here's what I realized about innuendo. Innuendo is when people make statements instead of questions. And when people say something like, we don't really know what your role is, what we usually do when someone makes a statement is we go, uh-huh. And when we go, uh-huh, they put a hook in our neck and reel us in. And we're here to find out, what your relationship with Detective Mark Fuhrman is. And normally people will go, uh-huh. But instead of going, uh-huh, I just kept looking in his eyes and I blinked.
Oh.
And then he made 6 or 7 more statements. And I could tell that he was wanting me to go, uh-huh. But instead, I just kept looking at him and I blinked. And then after about 5 minutes, the prosecutor says to me, "Mark, you haven't said anything." Meaning I didn't say, uh-huh, I didn't say anything. And here was my moment of David, speaking of statue of David and Goliath. I looked at Bill Hodgman and I said, "He hasn't asked me a question." And then I looked back, I looked at Bill, and then I looked back at F. Lee Bailey, and F. Lee Bailey sort of flinched a little bit. And I think he figured out maybe there's more going on with this guy than I thought. So he started asking questions. And I looked at him, and here's my picture as I'm looking into his eyes. I'm not perfect, but I'm not protecting someone who killed 2 people. What's your story? So that was my mindset. And clearly, there wasn't even a reason for me to be pulled in because he had taken the 5th Amendment. If he hadn't taken the 5th Amendment, then it made sense to interview me to see if he perjured himself. So I'm not even sure why we even had this conversation. I think it's because he may have been frustrated that the subpoena didn't reach me from earlier in the trial. And so he starts asking questions. And in the trial, there was a famous phrase that he used where he pushed Detective Fuhrman and said, "So you're here to say that you've never said the N-word." So again, F. Lee Bailey would start out calm. He'd frustrate you. He'd anger you. He'd outrage you and hope you go off balance. So I knew he would do that with me. And he starts picking up speed. And I'm, just giving him, 1-word answers. And there was a point in which he says, "So you're here to say that you didn't medicate, you didn't coach, you didn't do anything to affect Detective Mark Fuhrman's testimony." So you follow me? He built up this crescendo. And so there's like 5 people in the room. I'm looking into his eyes. In my peripheral vision, I can see everybody wants to hear what I have to say. Here come the sirens to take me away. But and so I'm looking into his eyes. I count to 7. And then I go, and when I do that, everybody leans in. I can see in my peripheral vision because they want to hear what the shrink has to say. And then I said, really, and then I did some innuendo with him. I said, "Mr. Bailey." And he goes, "Uh-huh." I said, "Mr. Bailey, my mind wandered the last 6 or 7 minutes, and it seemed very important what you were saying. Can you repeat everything?" And he went, "What?" I said, "Yeah, it's 7 p.m. My car is locked in a lot, and I don't know how I'm going to get it. But it seemed important what you were saying. So could you run it by me again because my mind wandered?" And see, people who are bullies, they don't care about having substance, because if they can provoke you and you're off balance, then they push you over the edge. Sorry about that. We don't exactly have a studio here,
Don't worry about it.
Yeah. But and so he looked at Johnny Cochran's associate, Carl Douglas, and said, "What did I say?" Because see, again, bullies don't have to have substance. If they can provoke you enough.
Oh, that's interesting. So he was just doing a game. What did I say? Yeah.
Yeah. And so he shared some of those things. And the point is, I had nothing to hide because I had nothing, I didn't do anything with Furman. And so after a few more minutes, he looks at the prosecutor and me, and he says, "I don't think we have to call Dr. Goulston on the stand." The point is, it was a moot point. He was just doing it for ego because Furman had taken the Fifth Amendment. I don't even know why I was still up there. And so he gets up to leave. And I said, "Mr. Bailey, I have a question for you." And Bill Hodgman, the prosecutor, is about 8 inches taller than me. So we're standing up, and he says, Mark, it's the end of the trial. It's okay. I said, you know how earlier in the trial, there was a statement that once you bring the N-word out, you can't unring a bell, meaning once Black people hear the N-word spoken by a white person, you can't unring the anger that is triggering them. And he says, "Yes, so?" And I said, "Well, yesterday in front of the world, you said you were going to interview me about Detective Mark Furman. And so you associated me with the most despised cop in America today. So you slurred me. Do you have any idea how we can unslur a slur?" And so Bill Hodgman says to me, Mark, they misspelled your name. Don't worry about it. And F. Lee Bailey looks at Bill Hodgman like, "Who's your little friend?" And so F. Lee Bailey leaves the room, and I'm gathering my papers together. And then he comes back into the room, and he looks at me, and he says, "I will trade you a retraction in tomorrow's newspaper if you tell me what you figured out about me." And I said, "That's okay. That's fine." But I hope that lived up to my promise of a good anecdote. But can you see how much it can teach all of us about people who mistreat us?